Welcome to EdUp Curriculum. I'm your host, Nicole Poff, and today I am so excited. I know I say I'm always really excited about the guests, but this is one of my most dear colleagues. We have been fortunate to have worked together for the last 5, 6 years, maybe. Um, so I'm going to let him introduce himself, but I am really excited about the conversation that's about to unfold. So without further ado, Matt, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nicole. I really appreciate it. My name is Matt Phillips. I am a Student Affairs Program Manager at the University of Arizona Global Campus. I've come up through the Career Services team at then Ashford, now UAGC. So I have a background in career services and specifically designing career resources. And before that, I worked as an admissions consultant for high achieving college students and medical school applicants. So some background there as well as some teaching of literature.
You're being really modest right now, Matt. Um, it's fine. I think your expertise is really going to shine through in this podcast. But I want to give some context here because you and I both know what we're about to talk about, but the people listening, they don't know about what we've done and what you continue to do at UAGC. So I'm going to just kind of give lay of the land. So UAGC, probably about 4 years ago, really made it a priority to start integrating career services into the curriculum. We worked really hard, and when I say we, I was there at the time, so I can help give some background here. But we really prioritized this as courses were going up for revision and development. Career services, we tried our best to embed ourselves in that process, and it wasn't easy by any means, but it's something that has been mildly successful. I would say so. Do you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, I would say, hugely successful based on what I know has occurred at the institution. I mean, I think you talk about trying to get integrated in that process. At this point, we are fully integrated in that process. I can describe in detail how that process works so people might understand how we work at UAGC with course developments. But before that, I'll let you continue with your context.
Yeah, and right when I said mildly, I regretted that choice of word because you're right. It is hugely successful. And at
No
conferences,
adverbs except hugely.
sorry. Once I said it, I was like, "Oh shoot, this is not mildly. This is hugely successful." And at conferences, the interest, really is a testament to how much people want to do this, especially the career services side of the house. They want to do this. They don't know how, right? And I think that's what we can do here is we can kind of paint the picture of what it can look like, but then also try to give some tangible, like if you're in career services or in academic affairs or any department and you really want to start getting serious about what it looks like to embed career services into your curriculum, here are some key steps. So let's kind of talk about the current state. Do you have any, and I'm throwing you totally on the spot here, do you have any numbers about how many courses or programs have career services integrated at this point in time?
General numbers would be, I would say it's integrated in every program for sure to some extent, even some of our doctoral programs. Courses, I mean, definitely dozens, maybe close to 100. It's a lot to even keep track of. I would say that we have learning activities that we've built in tandem with professors, definitely in the dozens in the last couple of years. Um, we also do a lot of work with the team that develops other learning resources around like Folio, which is an e-portfolio
Mm.
tool integrated with Canvas. I just did a script with them and they created this really beautifully produced video to help students understand that tool. Um, so numbers wise, we do pretty well. I would say we haven't been able to scale it as we could with an entire staff of people doing this work.
I'm glad you mentioned portfolio because I remember when we kind of first brought in, and at the time it was Portfolium, so it's has probably evolved since then. And I remember At that point, faculty were just trying to throw portfolio into every course. It's like, put this in your portfolio, put this in your portfolio. And so when we audited the portfolio accounts, we saw kind of a mess, right? We saw students who were sitting on their couch with laundry stacked behind them or in their pajamas because to them it was just an assignment. They was just the final step of submission. And so career services, we were able to come in and say, wait, 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 wait. If we want this to be professional, let's give them some resources, right? And so we gave them some resources about how to record a professional video.
Sure.
Um, I think Portfolio was really one of those places that helped me think about like tagging
Yep.
skills.
Yep. Yeah. So that's actually really interesting you bring up. So what happens generally, I think, in higher ed, especially in the online space, is we are given access to and exposed to a lot of different technology tools as our students. And like the tendency is, oh, I need to adopt the use of this. And we don't always think about the best use case. And it's now called Folio, at least our instance of it is. But as we start to think more about that, and we assess some of the content that was created and some of the learning activities associated with it, you start to see where you're falling short and where you're failing students, actually. So they didn't really understand that that's a network by which people can see their output. You talk about the tagging piece, after we get them to a space, say it's early in a program, and there's a couple programs that are integrating folio and e-portfolio use across their curriculum, specifically the liberal arts program. But once students start to see, oh, this is a representation of myself, who I am in a variety of ways, they start to think about it in a more specific, productive way. And so I liken it to like if you're teaching writing, if you can help students understand that the way in which they write, what they put on the page is representative of how they think, then all of a sudden there's a new level of seriousness that comes into it and they start to think about it in a more deep way. um, Same thing with these technological tools like folio. In our case, the tagging is really useful for the metacognitive aspects.
Mhm.
So students create even if they create a resume, for instance, and they decide, oh, I have a resume, I'm going to upload it to folio. How are you tagging that resume? Are you tagging it with the technology you used to create it, Microsoft Word? Are you tagging it with a skill you developed, like resume optimization? Are you tagging it with the technology platforms you listed in your summary of qualifications? Are you tagging it with, presentation skills? I don't know, but learning activities can help students reflect on what they're doing, which helps them understand what they're learning. And that metacognitive piece makes it far more valuable than just a repository of things they've uploaded. So we try to think about it in that sense, if that makes sense to you.
Totally. And I think that was perfectly said. Um, as I talk to just schools and people, they have this portfolio account, right? And they just haven't figured out exactly what to do with it yet. I think they are maybe where UAGC was a few years back when it was just throw everything into it. And I think that's where career services can really help kind of fill that gap of how do we help students make sense of this tool in a way that does help them take what they've done in the classroom and bring it outside the walls of our classroom. Because I think there is a really big disconnect between what students are doing with us and then how they're going to use it in their day-to-day, real world, and I'm giving air quotes, job.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this is a really good example. So I can give you a very specific example of how we did this at UAGC with Folio for one specific program. So I got to give credit to the program chairs, Dr. Adrian Hansen and Dr. Stephanie Fink. So this was their idea. What they wanted to do was use the building blocks, career competencies, which are available on Career One Stop. And they wanted to look at ways that they could somehow align aspects of the liberal arts program curriculum to that that bank of competencies. And there's it's like an ascending pyramid, and there's different competencies within. Um, but they identified one they really wanted to look at, and then all they did was reach out to me, and they said, "Hey, Matt, here's what we're thinking. Let's have a meeting." let's just talk through this a little bit. We have a lot of courses that are coming up for revision, so we want to think about it. And they knew their schedule about a year and a half in advance for revisions, even 2 years maybe. And we had a discussion about what they're trying to do, which is help students understand that a lot of the transferable skills they're developing in a liberal arts curriculum are applicable to the economic environment and the broader economy and the job market. So I actually created I took that, I forget the exact level they wanted, but I took those competencies and I started looking at the jobs that their liberal arts majors get and already have and develop into. And I looked at ONET and I said, okay, here's where we can align things where these things are connecting. So there were the transferable skills, right? Soft skills. But then there were actually technology platforms. So are your students using simply PowerPoint, right? Microsoft PowerPoint. Okay. Do students understand that they've now developed competency over the course of a few courses in Microsoft Office Suite? I'm not sure students always understand that. And then there were other types of, like Adobe Creative Suite is one. So they do use that in the program at times. Students have the opportunity. So now we're developing more technology specific skills. So we basically made that matrix and we help students in the first course understand like, okay, I'm building this e-portfolio on Folio. And that's going to carry with me through the entire program. I'm going to constantly be revising and modifying this folio. And so in the next course, they're asked specific questions and they have assignments they can upload there. But we help them learn how to tag those assignments. So that way they can have that metacognitive tool to understand like, oh, last course I was in Microsoft Office Suite. Now I'm three courses down and I'm actually tagging with Adobe Premiere Pro because I made a video and I edited in a free trial of Adobe. Um, and so I don't know, that's kind of how they started to think about it. And it's been really helpful. It also helped them, a lot of the summative assignments were papers, which is pretty common across the online curriculum. But then you start to reimagine, well, what can we have students create to demonstrate their mastery of the learning outcomes? And sometimes that's a paper, or students might want to choose to write a paper, but sometimes it's a interactive presentation. Sometimes it's a well-produced video from their home. Um, Students come up with other ideas as well that I haven't ever come up with. So you start to get them out of it's not one dimensional necessarily, but that sort of pen to paper only approach or typewriter to paper only approach. And students start to feel more meaning in the coursework, right? Like, oh, I'm in this 5-week course because our courses are 5 weeks for the undergraduate. And I know I'm going to have a paper at the end. Let me just look at the paper and dread that. No. Oh, I have a creative project coming up. And each week it's scaffolded. So I've actually got work done towards this project. So in week 5, I'm putting it together. I'm synthesizing rather than making something new. And then I might put it on Folio and I might tag it. So now I'm understanding the skills I'm mastering. Um, I'm saying all that as if it's easy. It's really hard. Students go, you want students to get to a certain place and they get to where they get to, right? But I think if as an educator, course developer, career services professional, you do have an ideal state, I think. And if you can move students closer to that, then it's a success in a lot of different ways. I'll stop talking because that was a lot. Sorry.
That was wonderful. And there's so many things that I could touch on in there. So many ways to take this. I love the idea of just a creative project. My first year of my PhD program, 2 of my classes, the final assignment was like, do something creative. And I remember thinking, I just wish you would have given me a rubric to use. Tell me to write a 15-page paper or tell me to do a 10, slide presentation. I can wrap my brain around that. But what I produced was actually things that were so much more meaningful that the school is continuing to use because they're like, this is really cool. And that I'm continuing to use because I think they're really cool. But I wouldn't have gotten there if they would have said, write a 15-page paper. And I think too, as we all start to think about the impacts of AI, right? These types of assignments are really going to help us ensure that our curriculum stays relevant and that students are, still creating meaningful assignments without the, overutilization or the quote unquote cheating of AI.
Yeah, I mean the AI piece, I mean that throws a whole wrench in it, but I think you're right. So if you're asking students to create something that is unique to them, um, it's a lot easier to assess or to evaluate whether it's truly from them. Um, I think that's another online challenge, right? So if I'm on a brick and mortar on ground campus, I mean, I can do formative assessment. I can ask students to write in the class for 10 minutes and then assess it. And then I have a really good baseline, or a fairly good baseline of what I should look for in each student, especially if I do that over the course of time. Online, that's a lot harder because they're doing it from, a space where we can't always see. I think that in general, students try to hoop jump through things that they think hold no value.
Mm,
So I'm going to be a hoop jumping student in a class where I'm like, clearly, this is just me checking boxes. Let me get through it. And frankly, who cares? I don't think students are wrong in thinking that in our current society. Um, the question is always, how do we convince students of the value of a specific learning activity, of a specific tool, or whatever it is? And we can't convince them that there's value if there actually is no value. So when you do the same discussion board assignment every time in every single course for the first week, students don't care about it. And they shouldn't care about it because we don't care about it. And we don't evaluate in any way that's meaningful. When we start to look at, like, this is something you taught me. It's like, let's look at the learning outcomes and then let's look at the course map. So how each learning activity, we have course maps. So it'll show you on the course guide, which is kind of like the syllabus, it'll show you the learning outcomes for the course, say 5. And we do everything based on Bloom's taxonomy. So all the outcomes are um, based on Bloom's verbs. And then you can look at the end and see those learning outcomes, which learning activities match up to that. And then you can start to see how balanced the course is for each learning outcome. And so oftentimes a really good place for a career services professional to attack is, what's the basic rhetoric of this course? That's what the discussion board is trying to do. Like, why are you here? Why should you care about this course? And for many of our students, not all, the career piece, the professional development piece is central to them. And so we can attack that also. And, I found that. So one of the things that's hard is, like, especially I'm not really one of the only ones who does this work. I mean, I bring in other people like career coaches at times, but you don't want to generate too much work for yourself, right? Like, that's a real thing.
mhm.
And what I've found, I would just tell everybody who's worried about that is, oftentimes faculty who haven't done a lot of that kind of learning activity creation, they just want to know they're on the right track.
Yep.
And then you could say, hey, this sounds really good. This seems like it's going to be really valuable to students. Here's a couple of suggestions. Here's some resources you may not know about. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, they're sending me an email or having a meeting, say, hey, I want you to look at this final product. This is what we have in week 1, and it scaffolds to this week 3 activity. What do you think? And it's like, this is amazing. You did. I mean, I could never have created this. So I think just that dialogue opens up possibilities. I got a little far from the question you asked, but yeah, that's kind of where my head goes as I've done this work more. I don't always think of that initial contact as more work, because sometimes it's not. And I can really come out on top because they're like, hey man, you really helped me. And I'm like, all I did was respond. Pretty simple.
Totally. And I think I was talking with someone, I was on a podcast for South Dakota State University, and their career services department is trying to do something very similar where they're trying to embed themselves in more courses. And we were talking about how one of the misconceptions when we talk about career services curriculum integration is that we are just going to come in and talk about resumes and networking and interviewing, right? That is the myth that we are trying to debunk as we continue to move this initiative forward. And I think you just talked about that in a really beautiful way. Like, we are not going to say, hey, in week 3, I know you're talking about this topic, but what if we do a resume review right there? That would be odd and weird. All we're doing is saying, hey, faculty, you know your content really well. Let's help students see how this content is going to be meaningful for their career so that they take the assignment a little bit more seriously, so they understand that we're not just giving them busy work. Or sometimes we challenge the busy work, right? And we can say, what is the purpose here? But that comes after relationship is built, right? We can't do that right out the gates.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the relationship piece is the most key thing, right? So, like, you definitely find faculty who have a great experience working with you. They're going to come back and want to work with you more, or program leaders or whatever it is. Yeah, the busy work thing is so a couple things. I mean, I think of it as the career dossier. That's what I call it. The dossier is like your resume that you constantly tailor for specific jobs. Maybe it's some cover letter documentation, or um, how you articulate. Maybe it's a portfolio for a creative professional, or how you articulate what you are. So I have found faculty are really adamant that they want to prepare students for the job market, or help them develop professionally, but sometimes we bite off more than we can chew. So, like, I want them to do, and this week they're going to do a resume, a cover letter, and actually, apply to a job. I'm making that up, but like resume and cover letter in 1 week is a real thing. Like, they say, okay, we check the career box if we do that.
Hmm.
How about this? Do students know what a summary of qualifications is, or a professional summary is? I'm not sure they always do. They don't. I'll just say that outright. And maybe we should focus on in depth work and craft just that section of a resume for this assignment. Like, how valuable can we make that? Because then students are really developing a specific skill that they can use whenever they decide to craft a resume. Like, students can download a resume template they can go on Chat GPT and even ethically create a version of their resume. They don't need us to do that work for them necessarily. We can help them tailor it, optimize it, perfect it. But what skills can we break off in pieces and integrate? So that's where people like you and me come in, I think. Um, I mean, you address sort of the invasive possible nature, and I get that, especially if you know it's like teaching on ground. Sometimes at like a state school, it's like, oh, I'll just create my syllabus for this intro to lit course, and they're going to read what I want them to read. Um, you know, because I have expertise, I have an MFA, and I know what, they should be reading and writing about. So it's a really faculty owned process. But what we're saying is we're allowing that development to happen, just have other stakeholders involved.
Yep.
So we always the first thing I look at, and this happens a lot, faculty member sends me an email, hey, I'm thinking about this for week 5 in this course. My response is, sounds like a really cool idea. I'd love to collaborate and help. Can you please send me the learning outcomes for the course, as well as all the documentation you have? And that establishes credibility right away, because they're like, oh, this person's an educator. They're
Yep.
not transactional. And the learning outcomes are crafted by faculty, and they have to be approved by faculty. And that's a lot of work. It's really hard. That is the piece where you're using your expertise. And so those carry the ultimate value for me. Those are the things we want students to master. And if I don't have a clear illumination of what those are and should be, I can't do any meaningful work. I really can't.
I think you just hit something that, especially for career services people, is really important, and that is understanding the course design process, understanding what learning outcomes are, how to measure learning outcomes, right? I feel like a lot of the success that has happened at UAGC is because career services, we meet our faculty, and I say we, I realize I'm not part of the university anymore, but I think I'm an honorary member at this point. Um, we we meet faculty where they are versus expecting them to meet us in our career services lane. So we took the time to understand what are learning outcomes, how were they measured, what is Bloom's, what is good course design. Like, we very much met them where they are and spoke their language versus having them enter our world. And I think that I'm going to make a wild guess here. And I think that contributed to a lot of our success because you're right, it gave us credibility to faculty. We could speak their language.
Yeah, so definitely an honorary member for sure. Founding member maybe. I It's really interesting you bring that up. So I have thought about this a lot. So I think I got an MFA from UTEP. I have a parallel career as a writer of fiction, but like that I was in a situation where like, well, I need to teach, right? And so how do I develop skills as a professor? And I enrolled in a program at Antioch University in Los Angeles. It was called the Certificate in the Teaching of Creative Writing, which isn't really a certification you need. But what was cool about it was I was asked to draw from a bank of literature about learning and teaching writing and formulate through the course of reading, just like in a graduate program, my own philosophy, my own teaching philosophy. And in tandem with that was like, hey, what is a learning outcome? How does it work? How are they formulated? Um, you know, uh, learning development theories, et cetera, and so on. It's sort of like a mini master's in education, but not quite as in depth, but really specific to writing. And so I had a really good base level understanding of how a professor, and I had made my own and I had taught at San Diego State. So like I understood, okay, this is a lot of work and it takes a lot of expertise to develop a course. So I have great respect for that. And I understand the basic terminology that an instructional designer, for instance, would speak,
Mhm.
backwards design, um, all the different methods they use. So that understanding gave me and you, we both have that, the ability to, yeah, speak their language and be legitimate. And it's not just about, I know everything we have related to career. It's like, I understand your process. How can I help? And that really situates it in a good way. And the other thing I think I'll mention um, is there are some courses and learning outcomes where it's like, guess what? This doesn't make sense to integrate career
Right.
readiness aspects into the course, and that happens more often than you might think. Um, and I'll give a rationale why. I understand someone asked you to check a box, but guess what? I'm saying this doesn't quite work from my perspective, and we have a conversation about that. Um, yeah, and it's actually really interesting work to try to piece together. Especially, I love looking at the learning outcomes in the course map and just seeing the weight of the course, and then going through everything and seeing how it's built, and trying to figure out like what's best. I'll stop talking. A really good example. There's a professor at UAGC, Dr. Nate Pritz, who I think you've worked with
Yeah,
previously
yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Mhm.
And Nate, he was revising a course. It's a composition course early in the general ed curriculum, and it's really cool. It's a writing course. So basically, he really wanted to get students who were, we used to call them remedial writers, to a point of college level writing. Um, and to do that, he sort of takes them through. It's very personal writing. He uses personal writing as a way to do that. And we got involved because he wanted students to form like create like an ethos statement, like a personal ethos
Hmm.
statement about why they're in college and what they're planning to do. And part of that was like self-assessment and also looking at like possible career outcomes or goals. And all we really did was kind of look at what Nate was doing and say, hey, here's access to ONET. here's how a student should look at an ONET and how they might integrate it in their, what they're writing about. And he took it and ran with it. I didn't do really any work other than here's a tool that we always take students to. So work like that is just, I think, really valuable. And sometimes it's like you might say something, just like learning. You say one thing and then a faculty member's like, oh, I got it, snap, and then they're gone. So yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about faculty here. And I think, at least for me, faculty buy-in, I found, was one of the most critical points of this work. Um, there were faculty in the ECE program who really rallied behind career services, and once we kind of proved our worth, they then shared with their faculty, it's worth coming to career services. Same thing, College of Business, right? Health and Human Services. We kind of found those champions early, and then they were able to go out to the rest of their faculty. But how do you get faculty buy-in? Like, from a tactical standpoint here, if a career services center wanted to establish rapport or start to do this type of work, what would be some advice in terms of getting that buy-in from faculty?
Yeah, I mean, it's different at each institution, right? So I will say, so at this point, based on the work you've done and I've done, and Rebecca Davis and our career team,
Mm.
career services manager, like we've been able to, and the faculty champions, we've been able to get to the point now where when there's a course development and faculty are being sent documentation about who can assist them, I'm listed specifically. Specific resources are listed, how to contact me. And so that to me is a very formal integration of this into the process. Faculty they have academic freedom and they can disregard it. But that came about because over the course of multiple years, I don't want to sell it short, it was multiple years, we were careful about our work and we spoke faculty language. And then folks who were faculty members became leaders of those various development
Mm.
departments. Dr. Jen Zauer, Dr.
Mm.
Tricia Lauer, there are others. And they saw value in it. And they say, well, we're going to integrate this. Well, when they redid a process for the course developments, and that's where we got integrated. Another piece. So I think you find your champions and just understand that they move other places in the institution. They're not going to stay in that one spot. Or, if you work at even an on-ground campus, maybe there's a chair. They have a rotating departmental chair every 2 years. Well, if you have a faculty champion, eventually they're going to become the departmental, they're going to have the opportunity. So people rotate. That's important to remember. There was another piece I was going to say. Faculty affairs at UAGC they wanted to develop a resource to help faculty develop like a starting point for developing their courses, knowing what resources are out there, what's been done before. And we had a really good relationship with Kate Johnson, who developed that.
Mm-hmm.
And so she reached out to me and said, hey, I want you involved in this. I want you to do a career services, career development learning section. So I basically built that out. It's a Canvas space. I did all the Canvas building, the coding on our little section. And it goes through everything from, we have a video that we made on Beyond, which is just a welcome. Hey, if you're here, you care about career development, and we're happy to help you. Our departmental learning outcomes, it showed various career development theories and which ones most apply to our students and why. I pulled examples of that match those theories from actual coursework, so I could see students, and from career coaching appointments. So that's all there. Then I have sample assignments. I have a list to talk about champions, a list of, I put resources, and then I have career champions. And it's actually just faculty members I've worked with, their emails. And that is instant legitimacy because they're like, these are people at the institution who do great work and you know who they are. And you're like, oh, he worked with Nate Pritz. He worked with Dr. Allison Reef. He worked with Dr. Teresa Couric. I think they know what they're doing. Like, let's reach out. So I think that's important. I I learned from another leader one time that perception is reality at institutions, especially big institutions. So any way that you can be perceived as professional, helpful to students, and respectful of others is going to benefit you in this work. It's really simple, but you have to be a good relationship builder. Like if I could give it a forward treatment, it's don't piss people off. And if you can do that, then generally they allow you to help them, and they help you.
The amount of people that you've been able to name, and I know everyone that you've just named, and there's more, right? There's Katie Shea, there's Morgan Johnson, there's people who are so invested at the top level who weren't necessarily always at the very top, but have, you like you said, worked their way up. The amount of people within UAGC who have cared about this work and continue to care about this work and share it with others, I think is one of the biggest reasons why why you guys are so far ahead when it comes to career services curriculum integration. Because like you said, Teresa, more every name that you named are people who really came behind career services and helped kind of disseminate it to the rest of the university. Um, and I think that's something that we can't take that we have to consider, right? Is we took the time to build these relationships, and then these relationships have continued to grow and turn into more relationships. I often compare starting this work to like starting a company. Like I remember you and I hustling. Hey, do you want to meet with us? Can we talk about your course? Like people were not always this willing to be involved in the work, but I think where you guys are at now is such a good case study for other schools who are wanting to do this type of work, because you guys have the buy-in from everyone now. Most people are bought into this.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like leaders, great leaders, I have found talk to other people about people they should work with. So, you know, this professor says, "Oh, you're developing a course in a departmental meeting. Hey, did you reach out to Career yet? Oh no, I didn't know I could do that. We'll do it." Right. So you talk to each other, I think is really important. And then you sort of make it part of the culture. Um, and, I think the other piece is like, there's so many career goals that students have and so many program outcomes and so many ideas. I mean, we have students too who are already executives. They don't need a resume assignment. So we have to take that into account, right? Um, I think it feels really expansive and almost too much to attack. So I think that generates fear. And so people shy away from something they don't know how to attack. So I think just starting small is really important too, even if it's just, here's a spot on Canvas and it could be an on ground campus too, or Blackboard or whatever, that lists the career services email and 4 cool resources they have. And you put it on Blackboard and you send it to students in an email, twice a semester. That's going to go a long way to starting that work. Um, and then you can start to be proactive. I mean, at this point, I will look at the course development schedule, and I have a lot of other responsibilities now, but I'll try to say, okay, I know that course is really influential on students. It's an entry point to their major, for instance. Let me look at what that course is running right now, and I can see it. And I can say, oh, here's a spot where we might. And then I can be proactive and reach out to that subject matter expert and say, hey, I know in 3 months you're going to start development on a course. Um, if it makes sense for you, I'd love to be involved wherever you see it fitting. Um, give me a, Outlook invite and we'll meet whenever you're ready. And like that generates a lot of work too. That is really valuable. So I don't know. That's the way I'm working it now. It is sort of like running a business. Um, then once you have a good product, you have to run the business a little bit less, if that makes sense. And you can focus on innovating and doing new products.
Definitely. And I love that you gave the advice to start small because I remember, oh, maybe 6 years ago, we were trying heavily to get into the ECE program, the associates of ECE, and we worked with people like Steph Heald. I think Ali Reef was part of that work too. And we just started small to try to kind of prove ourselves to others around the campus. Like we can do this and we can do it in a meaningful way. It was almost like a unofficial pilot, I guess. Um, what are some of, I know we're coming up on time here. What are some of probably the coolest assignments you think have come out of career service, bringing career services to the table?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mentioned the one that Nate Pritz did, and just as a writer myself, and I really like that because I see what students produce from it, and they feel not confident about their writing, and by the end, they're starting to feel a lot more confident they can tackle that work. Another one I was looking at before this meeting was health information management. Um, 252, I believe it is. There's an assignment where we actually created a career toolkit. And so our health information management program is accredited by CAHIM. And so it can lead possibly to students taking RHIA examination to get a credential. And so we did a whole, it was really cool. It's a career toolkit, and it broke down each of the CAHIM um, uh, groupings of skills, and then we showed which courses we put which courses align with those skills, and students can check it off. There's also a really cool career map that was from AHIMA, which is another HIM organization that shows the different career tracks, and it's interactive. Students can click it and see, oh, I'd go to this next, and that after 5 years, and that after I get a cert. um, so that was really cool. And it showed graphically how someone might go from a student to an internship to degree to taking an exam to a full-time job. So that one was really cool. There's some reflective elements there. In applied behavioral sciences, recently we did one. It's a career reflection journal. It's 3 options. So students who want to get in the ABS field, students who are already in ABS field, and students who are just here for personal growth or professional development for their own reasons. And they have 3 separate journal options, and they can write a reflective journal after doing there's some research elements that go with it, and some videos. We use Candid Career as a video plugin in multiple assignments. That one seems to be really fruitful because, again, students are writing about or making videos about things that they care about, like why they're here. Always try, and I think career coaches do this, right? The first thing is why. Like, who are you? How do you see yourself? Why do you want to do this thing? Or what, after what you want to do. And there's always a why there. So if we can connect students to the why they're here in the classroom, I find that generally it's really valuable to them. So I don't know, those are 2. I mean, gosh, there's so many others I could think of. I'm trying to, off the top of my head, I'm forgetting. The
No,
course
these
development hub was really cool because that allowed me to like collate everything into one place. And I have a bunch of sample assignments in there for faculty to look at.
Yeah, the course development hub sounds really cool. I haven't seen that, but that sounds like a great way, especially as again, as we think about we don't just help with resumes. We don't just help with cover letters. Giving kind of concrete examples of here's what some of the past integration has looked like, I think can just immediately debunk some myths about what career services curriculum integration actually is. But I know one of the things too that years ago we talked about was we aren't, our students are so busy, right? Our students, I read in a book, it was a book called Commencement, and this really stuck with me. At best, we are the third top priority for our students, right? Like they have their family, they have their career. So at the absolute best, we are their third priority. That's not great odds here. And so they are balancing all these other things. And so the time that they have carved out for us is really to work on their homework. And so by bringing career services in, we are meeting them exactly where they are versus expecting them to find time in their schedule to come to career services, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. So, and this is kind of where I've springboarded into a more student affairs centric role across departments because as a career services professional, I really started to understand the holistic needs of students. So, our students, let's just say if you're in an on ground traditional campus, 18 to 24-year-old students, you know, a huge thing in their life that might happen is, say, for instance, their parents get divorced. Well, for our students, it might actually be they're getting divorced.
Mm,
So that's a horrible thing to bring up. Or oh, you
fair.
have a small you have a baby cousin born if you're 18 to 24. Oh, that's really great. Oh, I just had a kid and I'm in a bachelor's program.
Yep.
And so yeah, how do you compete with that? You don't. You're not the most important thing, and you shouldn't be. So get students where they are. All of our resources have to be 24/7 on demand. I say all, maybe not all, but like we have pretty much everything we've ever developed in some sort of interactive on demand format. We use Rise 360 a lot.
Hmm.
There used to be a lot of accessibility concerns with Rise 360. They have done huge amount of work to alleviate those concerns and make it fully accessible. So we're leveraging that all the time. It's really inexpensive. Um, I've done a ton of, I know we're at time, but I've done a ton of like program toolkits that I built in Rise 360. Um, I did a really cool thing in one of the doctoral courses where the subject matter expert wanted sort of a learning activity where they could start to think about their dissertation focus.
Mm,
And so they go and Rise. There's sort of some self assessments they take, some brainstorming interactives they do. And then we integrated Qualtrics. So they actually fill a survey that asks them specific questions and it sends an email to them. And then they save that email and they're supposed to refer to it in the next course when they, want to start thinking about their topic. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about, but that's how we work for the most part.
yeah. And I love that you brought up Rise because that is something that's very easy for career services to use. You don't, I remember Storyline when it was like the desktop, those would take so many hours to develop. Rise is just plug and play. I say everyone can learn Rise. And then, yeah, you have this content that students can create, that students can use in a more meaningful way. Okay, we are at time, but Matt, this has been so much fun. You guys are doing such good work. Like, I can't even stress it enough. Um, the work that you guys do. And I see, Katie and Jen and Brian, I see everyone at conferences all year long. And we continue to talk about this, and they continue to raise their hand at conferences and share the work. And everyone, just like when we started out 5, 6 years ago, everyone at conferences is still just very intrigued by this work. And the message still is very much, we want to do this at our school, and we just don't know how. So hopefully we gave people some good ideas to consider how to make this work for them. If anyone wanted to chat with you, could they reach out on LinkedIn? Is that the best?
Yeah, actually, people can reach out on LinkedIn, or you can just email me my university email address. It's Matthew with 2 T's .Phillips with 2 L's at UAGC.edu.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Tell everyone I said hi. Hearing you say all the words, I'm like, or saying all the people, I'm like, I want to go work for them again. They're just a good group of people. Um, so thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all you've taught me, and thanks for doing this and getting the word out. I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.